We all want to win in life, and I believe we all can. I also believe success is a choice, and there are no secrets to winning. There are only core disciplines, habits, principles that lead to success. Yes, some have it harder than others, some have it easier than others. However, it rains on the rich and the poor, the just and the unjust, and the weak and the strong, all alike. It is up to you, it is up to us to rise above the clouds. There's a better view of success, a better view of winning up there. And Principles of Winning is here to help you elevate there. Welcome in. I'm Desmond Clark, the host of Principles of Winning, where we interview highly successful entrepreneurs, executives, athletes, politicians, entertainers to discern the principles and disciplines that they applied in their personal lives and their professional lives to create mountains of success that they've experienced so we can continue to develop our own personal and professional success playbooks for our lives. Hey, before we get into the interview today, I want to give a shout out to my man, Michael Sunquist. He's the Chief Marketing Officer of Strong Automotive. He came on last week and he really dropped some great gems for us to pick up from his Principles of Winning. Hey, this episode of Principles of Winning is brought to you by Des Clark Speaks. Des Clark Speaks is your preferred keynote speaker and corporate team development specialist. We help executive team leaders create pinnacle team success by establishing principles of winning, the 88 way. If you want to learn more about how we help executives just like you build championship level corporate teams, go to www.desclarkspeaks.com for more information and sign up for our free executive roundtables. Now let's just get to it right now. Today, our guest, his name is Bernie Dyme. I met this guy a couple months ago. I'm so excited for this interview. He is the former, well, can't be the former, he is always the founder, but former president and CEO of Perspectives LTD. Let's get Mr. Dyme on screen. How you doing, Mr. Dyme?
Fine, Des. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for having me. I hope I can add some stuff to your stuff here, your leadership.
So we don't even have to hope. I know you're going to add some stuff. I've already had one or two conversations with you. I already know some of your core principles that you use to help make you successful. This is a shoe-in to help people. So I hope people stay throughout this interview because there's going to be so many different nuggets that you're going to give. I already know that can help other people become even more successful than they may already be. But before we get into all of those principles and things like that, I just want to start, a year and a half ago, you sold your company Perspectives. Tell me a little bit about Perspectives. Where did it start? A little bit of the genesis. What did you guys do? And then ultimately you sold out.
Yeah, I would reframe it. I didn't sell out, but I sold.
No, you didn't sell out. You exited. You exited.
No, yeah, it's interesting because so I'm a trained social worker. I trained at the University of Chicago. I did a lot of counseling and therapy to begin with, but I got interested very early on because I started this organization with a partner, and I got interested early on the organizational as much as the individual. And I really then further got into leadership, what makes a good leader, and started that business and grew that business. And we provided outpatient behavioral health services. We still do. We provide organizational consulting and leadership development training, and we provide crisis management, and we provide all kinds of other wellness services. So I was all about helping individuals and organizations function better, both professionally and personally. Because as you know, if you don't feel good about yourself personally, you're probably not going to be too productive, and vice versa, from a business point of view. So when I recently sold, I sold in order to help take the business to another level and also because I've been doing it since 1981 when I started Perspectives, and I want to spend a little more time with my grandchildren. So
Got you.
that's me in a nutshell.
So I think most people understand the individual, right? How you help individuals with psychotherapy and some crisis management. But when you talk about helping organizations, give us a case study of a story of, hey, I came to this organization, they need help with X, Y, and Z, and was able to transform them into what they needed or wanted to be.
Yeah. So, I'll give you one example. We started out providing one of our main services was employee assistance programs, which is really kind of a service to organizations to help people individually, leadership wise, do consultation, and again, crisis management. And we did a lot of work with healthcare. And one of the things we learned early on was that physicians really needed some help. They didn't kind of sign up for leadership, and a lot of folks who moved into leadership positions, much like everybody else. And as we listened to what was going on, we realized that these were people that were in a high stress job and they didn't get the kind of support, and they were kind of thinking, I know everything. And again, it was a bad mix. So we kind of sat down with the organization and we developed a program to be involved with impaired professionals, whether that meant psychological, substance use or abuse, aging, or just not getting along with people, right? And so we developed a program called Professionals, an Impaired Professionals Program, which we do to CEOs, we do for physicians, we do for attorneys. These are people that don't always behave well, but that's because they've never been taught to. So that became a way to get involved in the organization. But we also realized that helping the physicians alone was not going to be sustainable. We needed to really kind of look at the organizational intervention, look at how we could train leaders to make sure that when people got back to where they were before, they were behaving better. The organization didn't, the term enable, they didn't enable them to continue bad behavior. So we then stayed with them. So that's the kind of thing that floated my boat, Desmond. It's like, here we are impacting individuals, and individuals are helping people. So they really, tough job. And we were helping the organization to better integrate them and see them as helpful. And it gets to one of my, I don't know if you want to get here yet, but one of my, tenets and principles of leadership, which is empathy. I really,
Right.
Again, I don't want to get there unless you're ready, but empathy is a big thing.
Yeah. And definitely, if you want to go there, but since you paused, I'm going to take you back.
Sure.
Physicians, executives, CEOs, leaders, these are all people that everybody assumes they all have it together. Athletes, well, probably not so much athletes with all the bad press we get. But these people in these positions, these are people that we look at, they're here to help everybody else. They're here to push everybody else, drive everybody else. What are some of the misconceptions that the general public should know of these people in these type of positions? Because like you said, leading with empathy is just never assuming, right, that you know. So what are some of the misconceptions that we have about people in these type of positions that we may be surprised or just say, that's interesting, I would have never guessed that?
So I think that's a great question. And by the way, I don't want to rule athletes out, because I think athletes are just like, especially high performing athletes, are just like leaders or anybody who's got a public persona, right? There's a lot of pressure on leaders. There's a lot of pressure on athletes, right? Physicians, for instance, you don't want a physician who makes mistakes, right? So think about that.
No.
Think about that. You want to make sure that the physician does a good job. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the physician, what kind of pressure is that? Because we all make mistakes, right? Yeah. There's no room for error. Same thing with a football player, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm a lifelong Bear fan. Usually that's good. Lately, it's not been so good. But to be honest with you, when you get into a high pressured situation and you throw the pass to a tight end or you hand off to a halfback and they fumble, that's what people remember.
Right.
And so that's a tremendous pressure. So what is it that we don't know about athletes? What is it we don't know about leaders? It's lonely at the top. And I think we think that they don't necessarily need the same things we do. They don't need, and a lot of times to be a good leader, you have to go to work every day and demonstrate that you're together. That's important as a leader. However, exactly. However, if you don't have the time to not be perfect, it's going to spill over into everything you do. So I think leaders who, when I talk about empathy, I think people think leaders don't need what we all need, which is to be heard, to be respected, to be cared about, to be honored in some ways. And I think sometimes leaders get caught up in denying that need. So I think, again, that's why I say empathy is important, because the best of leaders are people who have what are called high emotional intelligence, right? And these are, these are people who not only can make decisions. I mean, leaders make hundreds of decisions every day. Some are important, some are not so important, but that's a lot of pressure. And so the best decisions are made by getting input from others, because we all want to be heard, weighing that input, and then making the decision. So you don't want a leader who asks everybody for input and then gets stuck because they can't make a decision, but you do want a leader who listens to people, who talks to people. Not only do they listen, but they allow the other person to genuinely feel heard, right? It's one thing to pretend. That doesn't usually work. Employees are not stupid. They get it. So I think that's one of the things that's really important, is that we understand that leaders are human beings. And I speak to leaders and tell them to be human beings, to allow themselves to be real, to be imperfect, because that makes it a lot easier to sort of bridge that gap between employees and leadership. Does that answer your question, Des?
Absolutely. And a lot of what you said, I'm just sitting over here like, hell yeah, keep preaching. Because, and just speaking from an athlete standpoint and a leader standpoint, being an owner of a company myself, yesterday I was going back and forth with some people on Facebook, and social media is a whole nother animal that we can get into and do a whole nother podcast on. But they were attacking some of our Chicago Bear draft picks for having fun, like win some damn games and you guys stop doing this. And I'm like, dude, these are 22, 23-year-old young men having fun. And the comment that I got back, well, they get paid millions of dollars to do this. That don't mean anything. These are still human beings that they need to have a release, to have some fun, and they can. And sometimes I don't think people get it, especially on an athletic standpoint, that no, you're gonna drop passes. That don't mean that you should send death threats because you lost your gambling bet or whatever it might be, or you lost an argument with your friend that, hey, you say we were going to win and his team won instead of your team. Now you're mad with, and so it's all kind of stuff like that. Or, and I know with CEOs and people like that, they have to make hard decisions and then they get attacked, but they have to make these decisions, and it's not going to please everybody. And really what you said is lonely at the top. It can be lonely at the top, especially when some of those things like that are happening. And that, leads to what you're going to get into. One of your main tenets of success is leading with empathy. But not only that, but let me read it just how you sent it to me.
Sure.
You said, lead with empathy. Never assume you know why someone is doing what they are doing or why. That's huge. Ask first, always ask, and you may be surprised at what you learn. Your second one was this: coach people to make their own decisions rather than telling them your great idea. Number 3 was this: accept all people for who they are, no matter their religion, race, ethnicity, or lifestyle choice. Now, I believe these are some very profound, like basic, fundamental things that you built off of over your career. But tell me, where was that foundation started? Who laid that foundation for you? How was it developed?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I've given it some thought since we spoke. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I grew up at a time, I'm an old guy, as you can probably tell. I grew up at a time when the racial balance, and I'll be very candid, of the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
changed. It went from, and I was like in eighth grade at the time, it went from all white to 50-50 black white to 90% black, 10% white within about 2 years. And
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, for me, that was an amazing experience because I was at an age where I hadn't yet formed opinions. So I was able to see people for who they were. I was able to see why people were doing what they were doing. And I was always also able to see some pretty bad things happen. There was, and again, I don't want to get into politics, but this was a time when they were doing what's called redlining. So the
Mm-hmm.
real estate agents were coming in and scaring the white people and telling them the neighborhood was going to go bad. And none of us could really understand that in my age. But, after the neighborhood settled through, it was very different, right? It wasn't what I was told. It was quite the opposite. Everybody's a human being, and everybody wanted to be respected and heard and listened to. So as I went through my life, I kind of came to I came to this sort of sense that people are who they are. We need to accept them and not judge them because we never know why people are doing what they're doing. And that's why I say it's so important to try. We all fail, but to try. I mean, we're all imperfect. So to try to not prejudge, judge, make assumptions. You know what they say about making an assumption is to
Yep.
make an ass of you and me, right? Excuse my language. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really good key thing to think about. And to just listen to people without getting yourself in the way. And when you do that and truly listen, most of us don't listen either. I mean, most of us listen to speak, right? We listen.
Right.
And as you're talking, Desmond, I'm thinking, oh, well, and that's not, how can I possibly listen if I'm trying to think in my head what the next thing I'm going to say is? So listening means sitting back, and I'm a talker. So for me, this was something I had to learn, and I'm still on the road to learning is how to listen to people, and especially people who disagree with me or who have a different
Mm-hmm.
opinion than I do. And when you do that, that's what I mean by empathy. It allows you to step into their shoes, if you will, to get a sense. So with an athlete, again, to use that as a good example, it's, um, you know, these are kids. You're right. They're 22-year-old kids. So just from an organizational point of view, it's not only that we as the public need to be more sensitive, organizations need to take more responsibility for that too. The NFL, the teams, the NBA, the teams, they need to be helping these young kids, and they need to understand they're young kids. They don't have the kind of experience. I mean, I can't even imagine what it was like for you when you got out of college. You went to the pros, and all of a sudden, you're on the main stage, right?
Right.
Good or bad. That's a hard thing. And I think we assume that these kids, because they're making all this money, should be able to handle it. Why? So being able to sort of step in their shoes and get to know them and help and trust. Empathy leads to trust. If you don't feel like I understand you and I'm being empathic with your condition or your situation or who you are, how are you going to trust me? Why would you trust me? So I think empathy is the sort of core that everything trust, credibility, accountability comes from. Does that, again, answer your question?
No, I love that. And I love that last thing that you said is empathy leads to trust. And I feel that trust, especially when you're talking about in a corporate business kind of atmosphere, right? Trust is foundational. Organizations that thrive, they thrive because there's a thread that's woven in between the organization, and that is a thread of trust. Um, go a little deeper on that. So empathy leads to trust because of understanding. Like, how does that lead to trust in your eyes?
Yeah, and I should back up because I do have a question for you in a minute, but I
Mm-hmm.
should back up and say that I think transparency is important too. And the most important thing that a leader can do is to be able to feel confident about themselves enough to risk who they are. So I do a lot of work with mental health, especially training organizations and workplaces. And the stigma of mental health is huge. And one of my first suggestions to leaders is if you feel comfortable, to the extent you can feel comfortable, talk about your experience. Tell people, hey, you know what? I had to struggle with this and that. And, you know, so I will tell you that for me, when I came into the business world, I was a driver. I was going to get it done. I'm focused and I had my way of doing things. And I wish I had been more aware back then of this need to be empathic and not authoritative. And I learned that over the course of time as I realized that when I walked into the office, and in those days it wasn't virtual, it was all in offices. When I walked into the office, people were wondering what my feelings were, what my condition was that day.
Uh-huh.
And so they were watching for any cue possible. And if they thought that I was upset, that was going to affect them. So, for instance, I used to close my door every once in a while because I had an open door policy just because I needed to do that to get work done. I just needed to, when I closed my door, people started thinking, oh my God, something terrible is happening. They're selling the business. We're going to go broke. All these things. And I realized at first I was like, that's ridiculous. And then I realized, no, wait a minute. It's where they're coming from. How do I bridge that? How do I get them to feel safer? I do that by being a little more transparent, by saying, hey, look, nothing bad happening. I am going into my office right now. I need to get some work done. Just give me an hour. I'll be back.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds basic, sounds easy. We don't do that because we just sort of put our head down and go forward. So I wish I had done more of that when I was younger. I learned to do that about midway through my career. And when I did that, I really saw our business it was growing, but it really
Right.
took off because
You, you
people,
think
right,
you think it took off because people bought into you more, they trusted you more, they were more accepting to, hey, when you did have to be authoritative and have to give orders, they received that better.
so I think it took off because my confidence in myself, my ability to be empathic and listen better, my ability to be more transparent made people safe enough to take more risks. And when they take more risks,
Yes.
they start, that's my third, or
Mhm.
my second thing, coach people to make their own decisions, right? If if you want people to make their decisions, you've got to give them the latitude to do that. Remember, most employees, mid-level managers as well, they're trying to please the leader. So one
Mhm.
of the toughest things in the world to do is get out of the way. is to
Right.
want, it's like having kids, right? Kids do the craziest things, and you just want to sort of say, "Get out of here! What are you doing that for?" But sometimes you need to let them fall off the bike. You need to let them make that mistake in hopes that it's not tragic, but so that they not only learn, but they learn to do it themselves and they feel the confidence from you to do it. So when I got out of the way, people got in the way and really kind of pushed things forward. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And with you having all of these different interactions with other leaders and CEOs, so I'm transitioning to what your experience was with other leaders. You say transparency really comes when people feel good about themselves, when they're confident in themselves. I believe like one of my superpowers is the ability to create really good, powerful relationships. And I believe one of the reasons why I'm able to do that is because I'm always willing to tell my story, good, bad, or ugly, and let people know who I am, right? Without trying to put on a facade. When you have these experiences with other CEOs, is it more so of, hey, they're trying to put on this face because they're trying to hide something. That's probably not the right word. They're trying to project something, or is it more so, hey, I don't want to have to air my dirty laundry because it may make people look at me less than what I want to be looked at.
So can I turn this around a little bit,
Oh,
Desmond?
absolutely.
I'll put you on the spot. So when you came out of college, who was the first team you played for?
Denver Broncos.
Did you feel you could afford to make mistakes when you were in training camp?
Hell no. I talk about it all the time, but I made plenty of them. And I thought for sure I wasn't going to make the team.
And what happened?
I ended up making the team.
How come you made so many mistakes, though?
Well, you're right. And you know what happened, Bernie? I actually had a scout to come to me, and he got my mind right. He told me to stop comparing myself to other people and said, hey, just understand how good you want to be. And every single day, come out here with an action plan on at least one thing to get better on. And that became my focus. I still made mistakes, but my focus wasn't on my mistakes. My focus was on, hey, where am I trying to get better?
So you
And you know
got
what?
permission to make mistakes, right?
Right. And when I was trying to get better with hand placement and stuff like that, I promise you, I made mistakes. But it's like, okay, boom, when I try to block that guy, man, I missed my hand placement. So just the next time I had that play again, now I'm just focused on getting my hand placement or my feet in the right place or running the route at the right depth. I'm just focused on trying to get it right, not really focused on what I did wrong.
And so you've started a business. You
Mm-hmm.
play professional football. You're doing another little thing here now with your consulting. All those things you learned, are you putting those into practice now?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's really what it's about, isn't it? So we come in projecting this image because we think it's the right thing, that we know everything, that we can do everything. The hardest thing in business for entrepreneurs is that shift from being an entrepreneur to being a leader. And the reason it's hard is because as an entrepreneur, and we talked about this, you're doing everything. You're literally washing the windows, you're literally getting the guests, you're literally getting the contracts, you're fulfilling the contracts, you're doing everything. And you're growing. But there's a point at which there's a saturation point. And if you don't shift into leader gear and let other people do it, your business is going to stagnate. It'll stay at that level. And we know that not growing is like losing, right? Or it'll start dropping. And so that is when a leader needs to shift into being more of a leader and not a doer. And so I've watched leaders. So there's a gentleman who wrote a book, Jim Collins, called Good to Great.
That's a great, yes.
He talks about the level 5 leader. And if you read about it, I'm paraphrasing, that level 5 leader does a couple things. Number one, he's empathic. She's empathic. She's really got high emotional IQ. She's really able to understand people, develop trust, be transparent. And also, as a level 5 leader, it's not about them. It's not about them. And what does that mean? So when Lee Iacocca left Chrysler, what happened to Chrysler? It didn't do so well, right? Those leaders who make it about them, it works while they're around, but if we're talking about sustainability and growth, it really doesn't work. So my job, and I think you do this too, is to help leaders move into the role of being a leader. Some people come very well equipped, some don't. Some don't have the capacity at all. I think most can learn it. I really do. And so our job is to figure out what it is they need and how we can help them get it, not give it to them. Because you know darn well, somebody telling you what to do is not really going to help unless you feel some ownership. So that's what I experience with leaders and working with leaders. And that's what I was lucky enough to do at my business is when I got to that place. And I was late in the game on that. I got to be honest with you. But once I turned it over, I had my first chief operating officer that wasn't a mental health professional. I brought him in because he understood business processes. And we had a little sort of code between us. that when I got too into the weeds, he would tell me. And he would tell me by saying, you know what? I want you to stay at 30,000 feet. You're getting down to 20. Get back up to 30,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It helped me because I didn't trust him, it seemed, but it was really me I didn't trust. So I trusted him, and the more I trusted him, and again, you got to be careful when you at the beginning of a relationship, but the more I trusted him, my goal, you talked about going for the goal, right? My goal, you always start with the end product, right? The end product
Mm-hmm.
is I want a leader in there that's going to grow my business. So now I got to go backwards and figure out what are the steps it takes to get to that. And that's what I did with him. And every time I stepped in, because I'm a human being with frailty, he would go, hey, you're down to 10,000, get back up to 30. And that's the kind of stuff that I think leaders need help with.
And going back to your point of coaching people to make their own decisions rather than telling them, I think that's like it's an exercise. It's like lifting weights. The more you kind of force people, and this is just where I'm at in my journey with my company, the more I force people to have to think through their own problems, it seems like the better they become and the less reliant they are on me. And that was very intentional. I was talking to my wife one time. I was like, I think my guys rely too much on me, and I have to start to distance my telling them what to do and have them think through their own issues and just guide them and ask and saying. So, for instance, that let me get one that happened. I'll just make up one because I was just thinking about I don't want to put anybody out there. For
Okay.
instance, a company comes to me or comes to them and say, hey, well, we don't have. Do you guys have a certain type of way of doing the invoicing, or the way that we do it is not working for them? They come to me and say, so what should we do about that? And instead of, I was always the person, well, give me the phone number, I talk to them and I'll work it out. Or, this is what you need to do. Now it's more so, okay, what's the issue that they're having? Tell me about that. Okay, if you had to solve that issue, what do you think we should do about it? And so that's more so now. And I feel like it's that exercise of problem solving for self that continues to build that skill of, what, instead of me calling the leader, because he's going to ask me what I think about it. So let me get my thoughts together instead of just bringing the problem. I'm going to say, hey, here's the issue that we're having. Here's what I'm thinking about it. Now we can work together on it. Or he may already have it. I have a young 21-year-old. I love this guy to death because it's been a couple of problems that he had on Saturday nights when he was out shooting pool with his friends that he did not even call me and ask me for help for something that he had never experienced before. He went home and he figured it out. And I think he's going to be one of the leaders of this company somewhere down the road because of his mental awareness on how to find solutions, or just be able to grind through it until he finds a solution where, but he will come if he have some issues or problems. But for the most part, he'll do it himself.
But that's
I
a
just
tribute
want
to you, Desmond. That's a tribute to you because, look, it sounds like you were able to give him the latitude to make some decisions on his own. Because if you don't do that, number one, it gets pretty tough when every time there's a problem, they bring it to your desk. Well,
right.
You don't want that. You want to be able to be creative about growing your business. You want to be able to help, but you want to hire people that you feel can do it. And if you keep doing it for them, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to become more reliant on you and less reliant on themselves, or they're going to leave. Because what we don't realize is most people who come to organizations want to be active contributors to the success of the organization. And if they feel like, well, this is about Desmond Clark, he doesn't care about me. I can't succeed here. They're going to leave. They're going to find someplace else where they can be self-actualized, if you will. And it's interesting because you talked earlier about selling my business. So when you're selling a business, now I'm at the other end of the continuum in my life. When you're thinking about it was about 8 or 9 years ago that I realized that my business was largely seen as who I was. Not completely, but me. And I thought, you know what? Selling this business is not going to be easy, because my goal is when I sell this business, I want to be involved, but I want to also have the latitude to not have things dependent upon me. So my next few years were really focused on either hiring or developing leaders internally who could do it themselves, putting them out front. That really is hard to do because we're all narcissistic in some ways. We all want to be the star. But sometimes, I mean, you think about it in football, right? The linemen are the most important people probably.
Most important people.
And they get the least, press, right? Unless they screw up a block, right? And the reason for that is because they're making it happen for the running back, for the quarterback. They're creating the time for the pass to be successful. It's the same thing in business. It really is. So when I was trying to sell the business, the first thing I realized I had to do was recede to the background, not completely get out of it, but recede, so that when I did sell the business and we transitioned, it was a lot easier. And I will tell you honestly, for me, there was a sort of blow to my ego, because at some point I would call my chief operating officer and say to her, hey, do you need me for this meeting? And she'd say, well, it'd be helpful if you could be there. And then after a while, she would say, no, I don't think so. And I'd hang up, and I had two feelings. Number one, I felt, wow, that's great. Number two was like, wait a minute, I've just become totally irrelevant. And,
Right.
But I had to keep saying to myself, that's the way it
That was the
should be.
plan.
Like, isn't it like raising kids in some ways? You raise kids, you give them all this love and all this attention in hopes not that they'll stay with you, but that they'll leave. What
Right.
else? Where else do we do that? Give everything away in hopes they'll leave, right? That's really the way you got to look at things. So I think good leaders are the ones who can subsume their egos and their narcissism and help develop leaders. And again, sometimes people won't be developable, right? Is that a word? Sometimes you'll need.
It is now.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes you need to make them available for other employment, and that's okay. But
Right.
I always believe you give them every opportunity and all the tools to succeed, and and the ability to do it on their own, and it makes a huge difference. I pontificated for too long, but does that make sense?
That is great, and we, you transition into how you've helped that team. I just want to back up to that moment of time, when you started the business a while ago, and you had this kind of this epiphany of, man, and you already you talked about it a little bit, epiphany of, if I'm going to be good at leading this company, got to have the empathy. I got to coach the people to make the decisions all by themselves. And I got to accept all people, no matter what religion, race. At what point did that hit home and become really, really solid, where you say, you know what, here are these things that's going to get me to that next level? Was it a point, or was it kind of an evolution? How did these become your core principles
So
in business once you got into business?
yeah. So remember my training. I was a social worker by training. So we used to joke that there's only a few of us social workers who know how to count, right? And I say that with love for all social workers and all my colleagues. But so I started out as a social worker, and it was all about doing good stuff. And I created this business, right, with my partner. I got to give him credit. By the way, another one of my rules that I didn't put down here is always be the first to take the blame as a leader and the last to take the credit. I really feel that's the most important thing in the world, and because it gives the other people credit. So,
Right.
So at some point I realized the business is growing. I'm doing too much. And for some reason, we've sort of hit this plateau. And we had some rough times as well, as every business does.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, I can't do this by myself. I need some help. So I actually got involved in a group of CEOs that I was involved in for 20 years. And I had a choice at that point. I was a younger guy. I could go back for an MBA, or I could go for an MBA of life with experience. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And I probably ended up spending more money on this organization than I would have on an MBA, but it came back in so many ways. So I got this coaching from a group of CEOs that were in businesses bigger and the same size as me. And I was able, they really beat the heck out of me in a loving way, but they didn't let me get away with it. Remember I said earlier, being a CEO, it's lonely at the top. Well, this created for me kind of a board of advisors who, I remember the first time I had to present my budget, I said to my chair, I said, can I bring my CFO in? He said, no. I said, why not? He knows the numbers more than I do. He said, because you need to be doing this. I said, yeah, but I'm going to screw up. He goes, then you'll screw up, which it was true. I did. I put these out there. And what I learned is that there was a lot of blind spots that I had. And when I opened up to listening to the criticism and it was constructive, I was able to really so I learned a lot from my peers. I learned a lot from my coach. All of those things helped to keep me honest and accountable. And I picked a coach that I felt was in some ways very empathic, but also focused on business results. And that was not an area of my strength. I mean, that's not where I came from. But I learned. And then I also learned that I can't do everything, and it's important. So this was somewhere around midway through my career, my development, that I needed to hire people that were smarter than me. That's pretty threatening when you think about it. But Oh my God, they were smarter. They still are smarter than me. And it's because of them that we grew the business. And so that makes me a smart guy, not in the same way. But that's, I think, what we forget about, right? We forget that we need to not only do it ourselves, but we need to surround ourselves with people who know more and do better than we do, or we won't grow. So that happened about midway through my career. And as I said, probably about 20 years ago, I hired this chief operating officer who was amazing because he was able to take a look at everything we did and break it down to business processes. And I do believe this, even in social services, that reproducible business processes lead to success. And you need some latitude. I always joke about a Starbucks. I'm not making a comment about that, but they're able to be creative because they've got this box that gives them parameters on how to do things. And then they can be creative. If you don't have the box and you're just sort of shooting at the moon, you're not going to get anything done. So that kind of linear leadership thinking is not always what leaders bring, especially entrepreneurs. Is that, again, a long-winded answer?
So it's what you just said about Starbucks. A biblical principle that I learned is that you're going to have freedom when you have boundaries. Most people think freedoms is, I just get to go and do anything that I want. Well, when you go outside these boundaries, now that's where the danger and stuff lies. And so what you're saying, hey, we have these boundaries of how we do things and what we do, but we can be creative through all of this and figure out better ways to do all of these things. But we have a system that it should be done to protect us and for us to grow and get better. One of the things that you said also is listening to criticism. I look at a lot of podcasts and listen to a lot of people on YouTube, and I forgot who said this, and I know it was a guy. He said one of the best things that you can do is listen to your haters, or even engage your haters, because if somebody has something that they think about you, well, there's a reason why, like you said, never assume, but to go and know, hey, why do you think that? Why do you have that criticism about me? What is it that I'm doing to portray whatever it is for you to have that criticism about me? And you can learn a lot from that, because you know what you're doing good according to everybody else, who loves you, right? You need to, if you want to keep growing, you need to know, hey, what do I need to grow around the fringes? And a lot of times those fringes come in criticism of you. And if you can learn to listen to the criticism and dive into the criticism and gain perspectives from the criticism, that's where you continue to grow outward. So I love the fact that you said that. And I know we're coming up against it right now. Hey, Bernie, this has been a wonderful conversation so far. I just want to leave these last few minutes to you. If there's anything else that you want to add to the conversation that we might have not touched on, that is important or impactful that you want to leave us with.
So number one, I want to thank you again, Desmond, for giving me this opportunity. And I think what you're doing is really important, because I think these informal discussions on how to be a better leader and how to run an organization are really critical for either good leaders or leaders who want to be better, right? I think, as you said, hearing other people, not just the ones who are going to apple polish, if you know what I mean. I could use a different term, but I won't. But the people who, in a respectful manner, are trying to help you by saying, "No, I don't get this," is really critical. And none of us do that. We don't do it well. And it's not necessarily a natural part of who we are. None of us like to hear it. We get defensive. But if we can just get through it, you can always, if you can force yourself, remember I said there's a difference between communication is a two-way street, speaking and listening. And I think you should be an 80% listener and a 20% speaker. Because if you listen, you take it in, analyze it, chew it around, and you can spit it all out. You can spit some of it out. But if you pick up one or two kernels that make you a better leader or a better person, and by the way, I think those go hand in hand, you've accomplished something. So this kind of a podcast, I really do appreciate it, is I think critical, and I hope leaders do, or people who want to be leaders, show up and listen to you. So thank you. And the only thing I would leave people with is be yourself, be honest, and leverage what you can do well to give back to your community, whatever that community is. I really do think that would make us all so much better off. So thanks. Hope that's helpful.
One comment and one more question. Communication. Communication is, like you said, a two-way street. But I believe the most important part of communication is what people are hearing and understanding from what you're saying. And that's the part that we have to be very careful about is, yes, we're talking, we're giving information, but we got to be very cognizant and really intentional and even asking the other person, so from what you heard me say, what are you understanding from that? Or what are you receiving from that? Because we can talk and people can get a different perspective of what you're saying compared to what they're hearing. And that could be based on a lot of different things. So
and by the way, the reverse is true too. Excuse me for interrupting. The reverse is true. And one just quick technique that I use is when somebody says something, in order to make sure I'm hearing correctly, and in order to help them feel like I am listening to them, I will repeat it back. I might say to them, hey, here's what I heard. Exactly, mirroring. Here's what I heard you say. Is that correct? Sometimes it won't be. That's okay. The other person feels heard, and you get some information and clarification. So I totally agree with what you're saying there, Desmond.
Absolutely. You said something about getting the MBA or getting the School of Hard Knocks with your peers. And this is personal just for me. I have been debating about doing an EO, that organization. From everything that you've been through in business, would you say, hey, that joining a group of people, of entrepreneurs like myself, I don't even know why I'm asking you this question, because I know what you're going to say. Yes, it's it's probably something that I should jump into, because, like you're saying, we're in this virtual world now, And sometimes I do, talking about being transparent, I feel like I'm isolated because, hey, I can't look over here and talk to another entrepreneur and say, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Here's my idea on this. Like, shoot it down or build it up. One of the two, just give me your thoughts on it. So I'm not even going to ask you the question. I think you just convinced me just by hearing your story, which is the reason why we get on here and tell these stories, that I need to go ahead and move forward with that so I could surround myself with a community of like-minded people that's going through some of the same things, probably most of the same things that I am. So thank you for that piece of information.
Can I just modify one thing though? If I can, two things real quickly. Number one, find an organization that has people who run businesses at different levels of their development.
Mm-hmm.
Not just all entrepreneurs, not just all mature businesses, the whole range, because you'll be able to get much more information by doing that. You'll be able to hear how a $1 million and a $500 million business operate, because they're in many ways, they're similar, but in many ways, they're very different. So that's a good way of learning. And the other thing is, I think we all need to help each other out. So I'm willing anytime you need to pick up the phone and call and say, Bernie, man, this just happened. I don't know what the hell to do. Or here's what I did. I'd be more than happy to listen to you. And we all should be doing that kind of stuff. So I hope that's helpful, Desmond.
That is very helpful. And I'm going to give everybody out there a little one of my secrets. And I want to lean in when I say this. One of the reasons why I do this podcast, and I'm going to whisper it because it's a secret. I'm going to pick up my microphone that I have right here. One of the reasons I do this podcast is so I can build a network of people like Bernie and all of the other guests you see on here. Just a little secret. And that is Principles of Winning. Bernie, thank you so much for coming on. I hope that you guys get what you need out of this, take it back, add on to your arsenal of firepower, because we're all great. We just got to bring it out. Some of us have brought it out. Some of us will bring it out. Some of us need to bring it out. And I hope that Principles of Winning has helped you do just that. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in.